Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. Alhamdulillah wa salatu wa salamu ala Rasulillah wa ala alihi wa sahbihi wa man wala. I hope everyone's doing well this evening. It feels like a blessed Monday. Mondays are always full of great blessing, and even more blessed because the month of Ramadan, and we're fasting, and we're here with our teacher, Shaykh Walead Mosaad, for the next installment of the series that we've been doing throughout the month of Ramadan, which has been called 30 Days, 30 Deeds, reminding ourselves of deeds that we should undertake in the month of Ramadan, but that deeds that inshallah should then become part of our lives every day and regularly. And so tonight, Shaykh Walead is going to be exploring the topic of remembering those who came before us. And the deed tonight, the ask tonight of ourselves and of all of us is to learn a comprehensive dua for the deceased, for those who have passed away, and to say that often, particularly within the next 24 hours, but to make that a habit and part of what we do. And in this segment of our Ramadan program, what we try to do is try to understand how these deeds not only are blessed in and of themselves, but what is the transformative impact that these deeds have? What impact do they have on us as those who are doing them, and what impact do they have on those around us? And in this case, what impact can they have on those who have already returned on their journey back to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala? So without any further ado, we'll hand it over to Shaykh Walead, and we'll sort of wrap up just after 9 o'clock with a dua, and then we'll break our fast, inshallah. Shaykh Walead.
Thank you. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Allahumma salli wa sallim wa barik ala Sayyidina Muhammad wa ala alihi wa ashabihi wa man ihtada bihadihi ila yawmi din wa ba'd. So the idea of remembrance of those who passed before us is not something that's unique or new to Islam. And we read earlier today, either today or a previous day in the Seerah class, we were reading from Al-Fayt al-Iraqi, that part of the reason that the Quraysh, or the ostensible reason that they were rejecting the message of the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ, is because he was disparaging their ancestors, disparaging what they were doing. And I think in very traditional societies, there's this idea that where you come from, your ancestors, your parents, your grandparents, your tribe, it defines who you are, and it gives you a place in the universe, right? And to know where you came from, so to speak. And I don't think that the prophetic teachings were there to dismiss that outright. I think, the Prophet ﷺ, he told the Sahaba to learn from the Ansab, to learn from their lineages, that which will help them to know who their relatives are, right? So that they can show them kindness and understand that ulil arhami awla bil ma'ruf fi kitabillah, as the Quran says, that those who are closer in lineage, they're your blood relatives, they have more right to ma'ruf. They have more right to you showing them kindness and gentleness and generosity and all of these things. So he would say, Ista'inu bi ma'rifat al-ansab. Know the ansab so that you know who has rights upon you as a relative. But he would, however, condemn the idea that using your nasab, right, using who you go back to, your ancestors, as a way of taking a more prominent role in society, right? To say that, well, these are my parents, or these are my grandparents, or this is my tribe, and as such, I should be elevated to this particular status, right? An insistence upon someone in this way, this is something he didn't approve of. Even though the recognition that we all have parents, and the Quran definitely recognizes the idea that we have been made into قبائل and شعوبا لتعارفوا إن أكرمكم عند الله أتقاكم, right? We have made you into nations and tribes, clans and tribes and nations, so that you may know one another. However, إِنَّ أَكْرَمَكُمْ عِنْدَ اللَّهِ أَتْقَاكُمْ. The most noble amongst you are those who have the most taqwa. So he returned it to something that you actually have the ability to seek out yourself, because you can't control who your parents are. You can't control where you were born or who you were born to or what land you came from or any of those things. These are your circumstances, right? They're more or less thrust upon you. And so the Prophet ﷺ wanted to kind of reorient society so that people would not be functioning solely on the idea of what tribe they're affiliated with, who their parents were, right? Because then, in this sense, you perpetuate in society a group of haves and have-nots. So you're always going to have the people who are not from the most noble of tribes. They're always going to be the have-nots, and there's nothing they can do, right? Nothing their children can do, nothing their grandchildren can do for generations and centuries to come to change that. And certainly the Prophet ﷺ didn't approve of that notion, right? And even some of the Sahaba who came from outside the Arabian Peninsula, like Sayyidina Salman al-Farisi, right? And people would ask him, what tribe are you from? Right? What's your tribe? Right? And he said, I'm Salman ibn al-Islam. I am Salman, the son or from Islam. And the Prophet ﷺ would say about Salman, Ana min Salman wa Salmanu minni. Right? I am from Salman and Salman is from me. So he's throwing down the gauntlet, more or less, and saying, it doesn't matter. Look at who Sayyidina Salman al-Farisi is, right? And in fact, Salman, in his land, he was amongst the noble people. He was a prince. He was literally the prince of Persia. That's where he came from. But when he came to the Arabian Peninsula, it kind of would make a great movie, in a sense, but he goes to Jerusalem to study with Christian monks, and then he learns that there's a prophet coming to the Arabian Peninsula, and then he goes there, and then somehow he finds himself sold into slavery when he's going down there. Very similar to the Gladiator movie, if you've ever seen that, but that's another. I digress. So he finds himself into slavery, but he used to be a prince where he was. He was amongst Ilyat al-Qawm. He was amongst the most noble of his people. And then that completely changed when he comes to Islam. And so when the Prophet ﷺ says, very clearly, Salman is from me and I am from Salman, right? To kind of dispel this notion that people should be solely focused on the interest of their nasab or their tribes. So, even Umar said that, learn ansab in as much as that you will learn it to know your relatives, but don't go beyond that, right? And he even deemed it a waste of time. In some regards, if you're using it by which to, say that this is who I am because this is who my parents were or who my grandparents were. Nevertheless, the way that, this creation is that we came from a set of parents and they came from a set of parents. And these relationships form groups, form tribes, form clans, form societies. And there are ways by which there is a type of solidarity in our communities and our societies. And to dismiss it outright also, I think, would be a mistake. So they have their importance, but not their over-importance. So you find this recognition within the deen, a recognition of importance of relatives, showing relatives kindness and gentleness, especially the mother. This has been emphasized in many hadith. The Prophet ﷺ was asked, "Man ahaq bi suhbati?" Who is the one who has the most right to my companionship? And he said, the mother 3 times and then the father. And anyone who's in a close, proximate relationship with you, especially if they're not there by choice. So you find this parable in both relatives and neighbors. Because most of the time you don't choose your neighbors. They're part of your circumstance. And that's how really your deen will come out. Your deen is easy to practice with people you like, right? People that you choose to be your friends or you want to get along with. But how are you when it's people you don't get to choose, like your relatives and like your neighbors? And so the Prophet ﷺ often defined one's deen by how he treated these 2 groups of people in particular. So he would say that ما زال جبريل يوصيني في الجار حتى ظننت أنه سيورثه. I thought that because Jibreel was extolling me so often to be good to neighbors, I thought he would make him an heir. In other words, like a relative. And of course, we know the many hadith about kindness to relatives, and the Quranic ayahs about kindness to relatives. So taking those 2 together, It's it's part of a larger, I think, concept of how we deal with our circumstances that we think we may have power over, but at the heart of it, we don't have power over it. And so recognition also of what good has come to you because of those people who are in your life, especially like parents and grandparents and relatives, is something that also is part and parcel of the deen. And so recognizing that via dua, right, via supplication for those who have already passed. And, Salat al-Janazah, for example, the Janazah prayer was established for both those who are going to witness it, right? It's a deed for them. And also, there is a benefit to the one who has passed. And the Prophet ﷺ, he said that إذا مات ابن آدم انقطع عمله إلا عن ثلاث أو إلا من ثلاث. If the son or daughter of Adam dies, then all of their amal, right? In other words, that which will go in their list of their sahifa, their deeds, is now finished, except for three things. And the three things that he mentioned is صدقة جارية, علم ينتفع به, أو ولد صالح يدعو له. Either صدقة الجارية, a perpetual charity that was given, right? So in other words, if he spent money on a mosque or on a school or on any type of charitable endowment or charitable gift or something that is still running or partially due to his gift or her gift, then that's a sadaqah jariyah, right? That's something that will continue. Because all of the good that came, as long as it's still going on, that will go in their sahifa, right? Even after they pass. Because the best type of good, الخير التي يتعدى لغيره, right? خيركم أنفعكم للناس. The best of you are those who bring the most benefit to others. So there's ways you can bring benefit to others even after you pass, right? You don't have to build a school single-handedly. You can give $1 to whatever institution that you want to give to. You will see the reward of that $1 even after your death, inshallah. أو علم ينتفع به, or knowledge that one can benefit from. So if someone is a teacher or an imam or even any type of teacher, it doesn't have to be religious teacher per se, it could be a chemistry teacher, it could be biology, it could be anything that people will find some benefit from, then that's ilm yuntafa'u bihi. As long as it's ilm nafi', right? As long as it's knowledge that is beneficial to others according to the precincts and the parameters of the Sharia, then this is ilm yuntafa'u bihi. So any teacher who's doing that, right, they will see that even in the afterlife, even in the sahifa of deeds. أو ولد صالح يدعو له, or a good or righteous child that supplicates on their behalf. So this one you might say, how this seems different, because the first two, it's kind of clear that there is this type of khair al-muta'addi, there's this good that extends beyond the person themselves. So either the dollar that they gave, or the hadith that they taught, or the ayah that they taught, whatever it might be, that's very obvious. How about waladun salihun yad'u lah? And it's less obvious, but it's still there, I believe. Many of the ulama said that al-walad al-salih doesn't have to be a descendant of you. It doesn't have to be your own child or grandchild. It could be anyone who came into contact with you, and because of the effect that you had on their life, they supplicate on your behalf. And so that could be a lot of people, right? So any good that you bring to someone and they supplicate on your behalf, then this will continue to count in your sahifa, your good deeds. And that's a powerful thing. That's an important thing. And some of the ulama extended this as well. There's some khilaf, there's some difference of opinion, but most have accepted that you can even gift good deeds to someone who has passed. So you can gift someone your qira'ah of the Quran, whether it's the Fatiha or whether it's some other verses of the Quran. You can say, this khatma in Ramadan I'm going to do for my grandfather or my grandmother, whoever who has passed, and I'm going to read it so that it goes, my intention, it goes in their sahifa. That's also acceptable. Or even good deeds. Or you can establish something in their name. right? Even if it's a waqf, an endowment, could be established in their name, that also will go towards them. Or it could be, some of them have mentioned that you can make a hajj or umrah on their behalf, whether they did it in their lifetime or not, but you have to have done your first one, your faridah, your obligatory one, and then with the subsequent ones, you can intend that this particular hajj or umrah can go towards those people who have passed. So we maintain the connection in many ways with those who have come before us. And as we've said many times before, Islam very much is a transmitted tradition. And were it not for the people who introduced you to Islam, right, and if you were born into Islam, then those people most likely would be your parents or at least some relatives of yours. They're the ones who showed you this way, so you owe them a great deal. There's definitely a debt of gratitude that's there because they're the ones who showed you how to be and who you are exactly. And so recognizing them with dua, recognizing them with supplication, recognizing them with even deeds that you may do, like reading of the Fatiha, making a hajj or umrah, or these type of things, is something that the ulama have decided is very applicable and is commendable to do. Visiting their graves as well is also something commendable. So visiting the grave of those who have passed before us has several moral lessons in it. Yes, indeed, it's for i'tibar, right, to think about death and the afterlife, and that's an important aspect of it. But also, we believe there's a connection of the soul with the actual grave itself. So while the souls are mutlaqa, they're free, and they don't have to be confined, as it were, to the physical grave in the terrestrial realm. They're beyond this, but we still maintain that there's a connection between the soul and between the gravesite. Some of the hadith mentioned that this connection is particularly strong on a Friday, on Jum'ah. So you find in many Muslim countries that people specifically go and visit the graves of their loved ones who have passed on Fridays. But whatever day of the week it is, the idea of visiting the grave is there so that you may supplicate on their behalf. You can give salams to them, right? We believe that when the Prophet ﷺ, for example, after the Battle of Badr, and these were people who were not Muslim. These were people that they fought and died in the battle, and they threw them and buried them in the well. And the Prophet ﷺ said down to the people of the well, have you found what Allah has promised you to be true? Because we have found what Allah promised us to be true, right? Which is an ayah from Surah Al-A'raf. And one of the Sahaba looked to the Prophet ﷺ and said, do they hear what you're saying? And the Prophet ﷺ replied back, he said, they hear no less than you do, as what I just said. So he confirmed it that even people who are not Muslim will hear those who speak to them, even if they're in their grave. So when we go to them, Allah makes them aware in some capacity that we're actually there and that we visited them and that we give salams to them. And so it's a recommended practice to do so. Again, following the general requirements of the Sharia. We don't advocate that people do things there that may fall outside of the confines of the Sharia, but that doesn't mean that we completely dismiss the idea of visiting graves to begin with as a way of supplicating for those who have gone before us and as remembering them. And it's even more highly recommended to visit the graves of the ulama and the salihin that are well known. And the greatest salih and the greatest alim and the greatest person is, of course, the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ. So we visit his grave with that intention, right? We visit his grave with the intention that we're visiting the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ. There are some out there who say, well, that's bid'ah and that's wrong, that when you visit Medina, then you should make the intention to visit the mosque and not the grave of the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ. But that would be contrary to the amal al-ulama. That would be contrary to what all of the scholars before us have done. And one of the great Egyptian ulama, Shaykh al-Sha'rawi, rahimahullah, he once was in Mecca, the Egyptian Shaykh. People know him as a kind of a preacher and a public preacher on TV, but he was actually a arif billah, no question about that. He was a knower of God. So he was in Mecca, and he told his companions and the people around him who were there, said, tomorrow we're going to go visit the Prophet ﷺ. And then probably some of the handlers were like, no, ya Shaykh, don't say that. Go say you're going to visit the mosque, right? Not the grave, not the Prophet ﷺ, because that would be like bid'ah. So he said to them, so if I'm going to visit the mosque, I know that if I pray here in this mosque in Mecca, each prayer is 100,000. and if I go pray in the mosque in Medina, each prayer is like 1,000. So why would I go leave this masjid if I'm getting 100,000 per prayer here? I would just stay here. Why would I go there, right? And he said, we're not going to visit the bricks and the edifice that makes up the masjid. We're going to visit the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ, right? And there's nothing wrong with having that intention, right? So having the intention to visit al-awliya al-salihin, right, in certain places, including the Prophet ﷺ visiting al-Baqiya, the graveyard next to al-Medina, or in al-Medina next to the Prophet ﷺ, and the Sahaba and the Ahl al-Bayt, is something all recommended, right? And to have that connection with those who came before us, it is a very important aspect, right? You should never think that you're cut off and that we're kind of reinventing the wheel, but we are continuing that which they started. So every generation is continuing something that came before. And so we don't have the blameworthy connection to ancestors as of the Quraysh, right? Where that superseded everything in their life. And even if they were upon error, they would still follow their ancestors. But rather, we follow those, right, who were on the right path, those who were teaching us the right way, and we acknowledge that. And I should also say that even if you have relatives who were non-Muslim, right, or who passed who are non-Muslim, then it's good to have husn al-dhan about them. Much has been said about, well, if they died and are not Muslim, then you technically can't make dua for them or have mercy upon them because they're not technically Muslim. But I think a way of looking at it is have husn al-dhan billah, have a good opinion of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and maybe you can say to yourself, they died not knowing what Islam is. Or maybe they died and there was Islam in their heart, but they never said it. Who knows, right? Because all of that was within the realm of possibility that, people will be judged by Allah, not by us. So it's not for us to say that fulan fil nar or fulan fil jannah hatta. When we say fulan fil jannah, when we say someone is in paradise, that's a dua. We're actually asking Allah to have mercy upon them and put them in paradise. Whereas when we say fulan fil nar, this is blameworthy, right? This is what's called ta'alluh. This is assuming the divine perspective. Who are you to say who's in hellfire and who's not? The only people that were allowed to say that is those that Allah told us about. Abu Lahab in the Quran, very clear. Tabat yada abi lahun wa tab. And his wife, وَمَرْأَتُهُ حَمَّالَةَ الْحَطَبِ. Khalas, they're in hellfire. There's no reward in saying that though, right? There's no dhikr where you say Abu Lahab fin nar, Abu Lahab fin nar. So what? We don't make dhikr about that, right? It's not a tenet of our spiritual life. But to wish good upon those, right, where we have a good opinion of Allah, then we can have a good opinion of people. So it's a grave, grave, grave error that people do when new people come into Islam and they say, oh, by the way, did you know parents are in hell? That's wonderful. Great way to introduce them and initiate them and make them feel welcome at home. We don't know where their parents are. And if you're Muslim, technically you don't know where your parents are either. Right? We hope the best. We hope they died in the state of Islam, but we don't know that. So have a good opinion, have husn al-dhan, and say they either died in a state of hum ahl al-fatra, in a way, that they're the people of the gap. Islam was not introduced them in a way that would make them mukallaf, and that is within the realm of the divine qudra and possibility, and there's nothing wrong with thinking that. And to pray for the best for them is nothing wrong with that either, right? Ask Allah that hopefully they died in a state of Islam. That's not for us to decide. So, making then dua for the deceased, at least those who we know died as Muslim or said the shahada in their life, right? Because keep in mind, when we pray someone janazah over someone, that means that they publicly said the shahada. They publicly were Muslim. That doesn't preclude the idea that there could have been many, many people who didn't do that, who perhaps believed in Islam, but for one reason or the next didn't say anything about it. So they won't get a janazah, but they could be mu'min indillah. They could be a believer with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. The Quran, when it talks about those who are in hellfire, right, or those who are in paradise, it talks about the attributes of those who were there. It doesn't say specifically. So it's not for us to declare, well, that person died a kafir because he didn't die as a Muslim. We don't know that, right? The most we can say is they didn't say the shahada in their life, as long as we know, and so they would not be accorded Muslim funeral rights. That's it. That's the end of discussion. What happens to them in the next life, that's completely up to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, right? So this session, I think, was about teaching some of the dua, or dua that we can say. Some of them that we could say that can be said either in the funeral prayer or can be said outside the funeral prayer. One of them that I like here, where we say for the deceased, for example, Allahumma amilhu bima anta ahluhu wa la ta'amilhu bima huwa ahlu wajzihi an al-ihsani ihsanan wa an al-isa'ati afwan wa ghufrana. Allahumma anzur ilayhi nadrat al-rida fa inna man tanzur ilayhi nadrat al-rida la tu'adhibuhu abada. So this one means Allahumma amilhu bima anta ahlu la wa la tu'amilhu bima huwa ahlu. So deal with him according to the way that you are, Ya Allah, not to the way that he or she is. So if they're a sinner, or if they had made mistakes, and we know that such people may be deserving of discipline or chastisement in next life, but if you deal with him by the way you are, Anta ar-Rahman ar-Rahim, right? Anta al-Latif al-Khabir, you are these attributes of beauty, then Allah is all about mercy. So we rather have Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala deal with us by the way He is, rather than by the way we think we are. So this means we don't go into paradise or go into the next life thinking we should get what we deserve. Rather, we should be completely hopeful for the mercy of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, where He has reserved 1% of mercy for this life and 99% for the next. So we hope that 99% will be available to us. وَجْزِهِ عَنِ الْإِحْسَانِ إِحْسَانًا وَعَنِ الْإِسَاءَةِ عَفْوًا وَغُفْرَانًا. Right? And his ihsan or her ihsan, then zid fi ihsanihi, right? Then give them more ihsan, give them more goodness in the next life. وَعَنِ الْإِسَاءَةِ عَفْوًا وَغُفْرَانًا. But if it was isa'ah, if they had made mistakes, then tajawaz عَنِ السَّيِّئَاتِ عَفْوًا وَغُفْرَانًا. Then pardon them their mistakes and then forgive them their mistakes. وَانظُرْ إِلَيْهِ بِنَظْرَةِ الرِّضَى. Right? And look at them with the eye of rida, of contentment, of divine contentment, right? Which is the highest thing you can aspire to. رَضِيَ اللَّهُ عَنْهُمْ وَرَضُوا عَنْهُ ذَلِكَ لِمَنْ خَشِيَ رَبَّهُ. Allah is pleased with them and they are pleased with Him. That is for those who have khashya, those who have remembrance and reverence of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. فَإِن مَنْ تَنظُرْ إِلَيْهِ نَظْرَةَ الرِّضَى لَا تُعَذِّبْهُ أَبَدًا. Because how can Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala look at someone with a nadra of contentment and then they would be punished? Impossible. So we ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to look at us with a nadrat al-rida, right? The nadra, al-ayn al-rahima, right? Of the merciful eye, to look at us an eye of mercy and not an eye of justice, not an eye of adl, right? We don't want justice for us because justice is exacting and it doesn't make mistakes. And if we were to be done with by al-adl, dealt with by justice, we would not deserve anything. We would all be denizens of the hellfire. But if we were to be done by what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has of His infinite mercy and virtue and fadl and lutf, then we're hopeful that every single one of us will be entered into paradise, right? And that understanding should be applied in this life too. So we shouldn't expect or require exacting justice on others, those who have wronged us, but we should look at them also with an eye of mercy and look to their mistakes that they can be forgiven, just like we would like our mistakes to be forgiven. Another one that he has here, Allahumma kana muhsinan fazid fi min ihsanihi wa in kana musi'an fatajawaz an sayyi'ati, similar to what we said before. If he is muhsin, then increase him in his hasanat and his ihsan. Wa in kana musi'an, then forgive and pardon and look past. And if you don't have anything else memorized, if this is too long, the minimum you could say, Allahumma ighfir lahu warhamhu, right? Allah ighfir lahu, forgive his sins, warhamhu, and show mercy upon him or her. And this can be done inside the janazah prayer itself. It could be done outside of the janazah prayer. It could be done at the grave when you go visit later. Or it could be done in your place, wherever you are, wherever that person may be. So, this is outside of time, space, continuum as it was, so you don't have to actually physically be there. But as long as you can remember them and you can think about them, then know that, inshallah, that dua that you make, as we mentioned in the hadith, will be in their list of good deeds. We also know additionally from the Quran that people who are righteous people in this life, they will be able to make shafa'ah and take people with them. Right? So, ash-shafa'a al-'uzma lin-Nabi sallallahu alayhi wa sallam. The greatest shafa'ah or the greatest intercession is for the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alayhi wa sallam. And the shafa'a al-'uzma or the greatest intercession will be for the beginning of the hisab, right? When everyone is in Ard al-Mahshar, when everyone is on the newly created plane and the newly created sun that are not the sun of the earth or the plane of the earth, but Allah creates them specifically for that occasion of the gathering, al-Mahshar, then with the sun beating down upon us, what will seem like perhaps thousands of years for some, and they will be drenched in their sweat. Some people will be swimming in it, literally. And then people will be begging all of the prophets who will be there with us to intercede, and all would cite themselves, nafsi, nafsi, except for the Prophet ﷺ, and he would say, ana laha. So that would be the greatest intercession. But there are other intercessions as well. And the Prophet ﷺ will have a series of intercessions. Each other prophet of the like Isa and Musa and Dawood and Sulaiman and Nuh and Ibrahim, they will also intercede for their aqwam, for their people. But also the righteous amongst us will also intercede. Some up to thousands or 70,000 people or 70 people, depending upon their maqam, they will intercede. And so those dhurriya, right, those who were from amongst their progeny, they can bring them with them, right? They have the ability to do that. That you may have a righteous ancestor somewhere, all you have to do is try to be on the path they were on, and perhaps you will be with them in the next life. And perhaps you will have progeny who will come after you, maybe 20, 30, even 40 generations down from now, that you will never know, but you will know them on the Day of Judgment because you'll want to take them with you to paradise, right? So we have these kind of connections with those who came before us, and indeed with those who are yet to come. And that's all part of the divine wisdom. So, as a good deed, it's always good to make dua for other people, especially those who have passed, especially those who have some type of fadl alik, those who you owe something to, either they're your parents, or they were a teacher, or they were your shaykh, or they taught you something, or they did a good deed to you. Then it's good to remember those people in dua. That's the least way, or the most way in some ways, to pay them back, if you could pay them back for the good that they have shown you. So we ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to forgive us and to forgive our sins, and to forgive the sins of those who have passed before us, from all the mu'mineen and all the mu'minat, and all the muslimin and all the muslimat. إِنَّكَ قَرِيبٌ مُجِيبُ الدَّعْوَاتِ. You are close and you will answer the dua, especially in this blessed middle of the month of Ramadan. We are halfway through the days of maghfirah, and so we ask maghfirah for all of us in this room, and all of the Muslims in the Greater Toronto area, and all the Muslims in Canada and in North America, and in the Northern Hemisphere, and in the Southern Hemisphere, and the Eastern and the Western Hemispheres, and all of those who have came before us. We do not lose anything by Allah completely expunging their sins and removing all of their list of bad deeds and replacing them with good deeds, and to enter them into His paradise and to show mercy upon them, so that perhaps we too can be shown mercy when we go, and that we are entered into our graves, and their graves of light and their graves of ease, and to enter paradise without hisab, wala itab, wala munaqasha, that we enter paradise without chastisement, without munaqasha, without argumentation over our deeds and that we did, and that we enter paradise bighayri hisab, right, without a full accounting of our deeds and humiliation before everyone else. We want to be saved on that day. We want to be mastur. We want to be covered. We want to be completely enveloped in the mercy of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, so that we may find felicity in the next life, and that Allah pardon our sins and the sins of those who came before us. وآخر دعوانا الحمد لله رب العالمين سبحان رب العزة عما يصفون وسلام على المرسلين والحمد لله رب العالمين. اللهم اختم لنا بأسرار سورة الفاتحة.
Shaykh Walead, we have a few minutes before we're gonna call the adhan, so I wonder if I could ask you a question.
Sure.
I think one of the important reflections that comes out of what you've said is that in many ways, I think there was a time, obviously when we were younger, when we saw our own parents sort of guide us through the passing of those who are close to us, uncles and aunties and our grandparents and others.
Mm-hmm.
And now we find ourselves coming into the role that our parents once assumed,
Mm-hmm.
that we're sort of the ones who are going to the janazas and
Mm-hmm.
washing the bodies
Mm-hmm.
and preparing those who have passed and so on. And I think in this transition, for many people, it's a bit of a shock,
Yeah.
because it's something that even over the last few years, thought to myself, these are the things that my dad did.
Right.
These are the things that my father took care of, or
Mm-hmm.
our uncles and aunties took care of.
Mm-hmm.
And I just reflect that what you've described today in terms of recognizing the past and those who came before us, but also recognizing our link with them. That all of that is preparation for our own responsibilities as those around us.
Mm-hmm.
Allah knows when any one of us is going to go, but as the elders sometimes, as the elders pass away, and those of us who are there to kind of guide that process. And I wonder what a beautiful education it is, that if that thing is inculcated, that these prayers for those who have passed and the sensitivity is inculcated in us at an early age. In a way, we spend our whole lives getting ready, not only for our own passing, but actually we get ready for being those who will facilitate the journey for others, the transition for others from this life to the next.
Yeah, I think it's vitally important that sometimes we think our own children are too young to go to the janazah or witness it or anything like that. But I think they're never too young, actually. If they're above the sin of discernment, the age of discernment, then they can recognize what's going on. Then it's important to know that, that 6 foot deep hole in the ground is where we're all going to end up, and that's the reality of the world. And it is the most well acknowledged reality there is, because every human being acknowledges it, whether they believe in God or not. But yet it is the one that we kind of the least anticipated. We all know we're going to die, but it's in the back of the mind. We're not thinking about it. And I think that we have to live lives where we train our children and those around us that death is something that is part of life, and that when we take them to the janazah and we take them to the funeral prayer, and then they go out to the gravesite, and then they pick the dirt in their hand or in the shovel, and they're the ones who throw it on the grave. I think that's a very important lesson that has to be learned, and everybody has to learn it. And perhaps our parents and grandparents perhaps had a better job of doing it because they were inheriting that practice. But today we shouldn't desensitize or kind of, I don't know how to say, like whitewash the whole thing and make it kind of this very sterile type of thing, and they don't see any of that aspect. Our kids, they should know that the body gets washed and that it's wrapped in shrouds, and then we place it in front of us in a masjid, and we pray over it, and we have the person the head facing towards the east, facing towards the qibla, and that's how we arrange the graves. And then when we put them in the grave, that how we build the grave, and that we lay type of brick type of things over it, and then we put the dirt on top of that, and then we get up and we leave and we walk away. And then that person's life can be summarized in a paragraph, right? Or even if they were a really great person, maybe a few pages, but that's it. They did this, and they went to school here, they had these number of kids, and that's the obituary, and that's it. So I think it's important that it gives you an insight into the value of time, the value of life, how precious it is, how much of a gift it is, that nothing should be taken for granted, that any single moment, any one of us, the next moment cannot be. And so you live every day like it's your last day. You pray every prayer like it's your last prayer, right? You pray you read every page of the Quran like it's the last time you're going to open it up. And if we go to it, with this particular attitude, you greet people like it's the last time you're going to see them, right? Because it may be. I've had people in my life that have passed, and I regret that, I had opportunity to see them before they passed, and I didn't, because you never know when that's going to happen. So I think it's a very profound thing, and to me, even though it sounds kind of all morbid in a sense, but there's a beauty about it, because there's a kind of we call it final resting place, but that's actually what it is. I mean, this life is ked. It's, لَقَدْ خَلَقْنَا الْإِنسَانَ فِي كَبَدٍ. It's difficulties and trials, and every single one of us, we all have something somewhere in our life. There's a source of difficulty, and we're trying to get over it, and we're trying to do better, and things like this. And it's wonderful and beautiful to know that there's some place we're all going to be gathered later on. We're going to reminisce about this. And say, yeah, I remember that one time in Secret Hub when we had that thing. We talked about death. Yeah, yeah. And that will be on, the day in paradise when we're sitting, surur mutaqabilin, facing each other in these lounge, laze type of chairs. I don't know what they're going to look like, but that's what it says in the Quran. Surur mutaqabilin, right? And we'll reminisce, and that's the dwellers of paradise. They'll reminisce about what they did in this life. And that will be the epitome of life as it is, real life, right? Eternal life. So that's something I think it should never be too far from our thoughts, from our contemplation, from our fikr. And that's really the object of fikr and dhikr in this life, is to remember that this is fani, this is going to dissolution, this is ending. And everything around you tells you this is ending. And the sooner that we kind of imbibe that lesson within ourselves, then that will give you a richer life here, because you know how precious it is, how much a gift it is, and then in the next life, you'll be able to reap those rewards, inshallah. So we ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to give us a greater understanding of the deen, and that, the times of disremembrance or ghafla that happen to all of us, that we know that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has the power to put us in a state of remembrance all the time, but even if we fall into these ghafalat, we ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to remind us quickly, that even when we do fall into them, that immediately we recall and we turn back to Him, and that He give us the opportunity. And always we know that the door of tawbah and istighfar is open to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and we may never forget that, inshaAllah. Alhamdulillahi Rabbil Alameen.